There was once a day, not too long ago, when the internet was young and our vintage machines weren't, well, quite so vintage. When you could fire up your compact Mac, launch Netscape 2.0, and happily browse the internet without limitation in all of its one-bit glory. Well, since then, the web has changed quite a bit. So today, let's try to do something about that, and maybe just reinvent the entire modern internet for our vintage computers. So stay tuned. Back in the 90s, when the internet was young, the web was primarily composed of documents linked together. We call those documents pages, and sure, they sometimes contained a cheesy animated under construction and email us GIF, but fundamentally, they were static documents filled with text that linked to other documents. But as the 90s gave way to the 2000s, or the noughties as some of you call it, the character of the web began to change. More interactive services began to pop up, calling themselves Web 2.0, social media, web-based email, video, and so on. These services were shoehorned into browser technologies never meant to support such things, which created kind of a never-ending cycle of change that required more and more powerful computers to run the latest web browsers. But while Web 2.0 quickly grew into the monsters that we call modern web apps, the static web never really went away. The most visited website in the US by a pretty wide margin is Wikipedia, a site primarily comprised of text articles to be read. So what would happen if we had some way to strip away all of that modern web nonsense from pages before they ever reached your browser? Would that make sites like Wikipedia usable on your compact Mac? Or literally any website with text on it? Well, that's the idea that I had, so I built it. And actually, this theory worked so well that I built two websites, which together wound up actually making a huge chunk of the internet accessible from my vintage computers, just like the old days. And not just old Macs either. In fact, we've had modern websites perfectly usable on computers as old as a 1979 TRS-80 Model 2. So let's fire up my favorite cursed Mac SE40, and I'll show you what these sites do, how I built them, and then we'll try out a bunch of vintage computers to see just what the modern internet experience can be on an old machine once you strip out all of the garbage. Today's Macintosh shenanigans are brought to you by Skillshare. As you've probably figured out from watching these videos, I'm not exactly a professional cinematographer. In fact, I pretty much have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to producing videos. So when Skillshare gave me access to their online learning community, I was quite impressed by the depth of content available. Everything from filmmaking to graphic design to web development. The first thing I did was dive into YouTube Success, Script Shoot and Edit with MKBHD, who's easily one of my favorite tech YouTubers. And honestly, I got a ton out of these short, hands-on lessons about planning visuals, shooting, and editing footage. Skillshare is less than $10 a month with an annual subscription, and they're always launching new premium classes, including live classes. And as an added bonus, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click on the link in the description will get a free trial of Skillshare premium membership so that you can explore your creativity. And now, back to the Mac. So the first site I built is 68k.news, which takes Google News and breaks it down to extremely basic HTML that old browsers can handle, specifically targeting the HTML 2.0 spec and tested with Netscape 2.0.2 on my SE30 here, actually back when it was a 16 megahertz 68030. The front page and the different sections here were built from the Google News RSS feed, and it's parsed through a PHP library called SimplePy. I take the resulting HTML and try to strip out anything that wasn't available in HTML 2.0. But the real magic is in the articles, which are really the most important part, and also the most difficult part because every website has different things that need to be stripped out to get down to basic text and HTML. And fortunately, I found the Mozilla Readability Library, which is the same code that powers Firefox's excellent reader mode and is open source, And it works by scoring each element on the page to determine what's most likely to be actual text article content. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. And I'd say about 80% of articles on Google News work just fine, which I then take the results and I further strip the readability into basic HTML 2.0. And I then wrote an image viewer, also in PHP, which takes the images from the articles and compresses them and resizes them down to something that an old browser can handle. And I don't have the articles inline in the text. Actually, I split them out into links at the top of the article just in case your browser can't handle it. So you have the option to view the images, but you're not forced to. I then shared this out to social media and retro battle stations on Reddit, and the response actually took me by surprise. The Register wrote an article about 68K News, and it was even on the front page of Hacker News all day. I think beyond the notion of just reading news on a vintage computer, the idea that stripping out all of the user hostile stuff like ads and social media trackers could make pages load so much faster and still be just as usable really struck a chord with people. And you know what? It's just kind of peaceful reading the news on an old computer this way, just you and the text with no distractions from autoplay videos and pop-up ads and all of the funky page layouts that litter the internet. After the unexpected success of 68K News, I realized I could probably apply this method to just about any website on the internet. And search engines didn't used to be complicated. Back in the good old days, you typed into a search box and got a list of links and descriptions of what the pages contain. And you also had choice back before Google came to dominate. FrogFind works in much the same way as 68K News, except the homepage, which I wrote from scratch in PHP. The search results are provided by the best modern search engine, DuckDuckGo, and they're run through a parser I made to strip them down to extremely basic HTML. Then, clicking through to any result will load it just like the news articles. Mozilla Readability to pull out the text, and my parser to turn it into extremely basic HTML. And the end result is pretty convincing. You can use FrogFind just like any other search engine, and I think you'll find that many pages are both fast and fully usable this way. In addition, my code replaces all of the links on a page with the FrogFind version, meaning you can click on any link on a page and browse deep into a website. Your vintage computer is really a first-class internet citizen once again. Additionally, you can enter any URL into the FrogFind address bar, and you can try to visit it using the same method, and it'll go through my proxy, which is readability, and break it down to basic HTML, and then replace all the links so you can browse again deep into just about any website, and it's super fast even here on a very old machine. Okay, let's pull out some of our other old computers and see if we can get a usable experience on them. This is a 1994 PowerBook 540C, and although it's a couple years newer than the SE40, it's a lot less powerful. It has 40 megs of RAM instead of 128, and it has a markedly slower processor, a 33 MHz 68LC040, the cost-reduced mobile version of the 040 in the other machine. So let's load Netscape Navigator 3.0 Gold and see if we can't browse the news and do a little searching. All right, 68k.news, and that loaded pretty much instantly. Let's check out our technology section. And yeah, scrolls pretty well. Looks pretty good in color. Much nicer to read on this screen, I think, with the light gray background that Netscape Navigator does automatically. And we can read about this crazy sale of a Super Mario Brothers cartridge from 1986. They have a picture of it here. And yeah, this stuff loads super fast. And now we have a nice color picture of the graded Super Mario Brothers. Pretty neat. And yeah, just look how fast this loads on this 33 megahertz computer. The articles load instantly. Images load nice and fast. What in the heck is that? Yeah, it's just like browsing the old internet, except it's all of the new internet. Something about Starlink. I cannot believe how well this turned out. Honestly, I built this as an experiment, and I wanted something to do on my compact Macs on the internet, and it just worked better than I ever imagined it would. All right, why don't we go and search for something on FrogFind. Stealth Apple 2GS. Not to give spoilers for a future video, but that's something I've always wanted to build. And yeah, look, here it is on a blog, Scott's blog, and yeah, see, just basically a random site on the internet. We can go to it just like the old days, and it loads super fast. We can view the images. Look, there's his Stealth 2GS. Not going to try eBay because that's kind of a modern site. Can't try YouTube, but here is a Wikipedia link. Obviously, we know Wikipedia works pretty well. Yeah, these images load nice and fast and look great in color. And of course, these are meant for low resolutions like old Macs and old machines, so they'll be very tiny on your modern computer. Yeah, honestly, this is the first time I've tried browsing on this particular laptop on these sites, and it is just super fast. Just like we're browsing the old internet again, except it's all of the new internet. And now a little something for our friends on the dark side. This is a tiny Toshiba Libretto 50CT with a 75 megahertz Pentium and 32 megs of RAM with Windows 98 on this 6-inch, actually pretty nice active matrix display. So let's try Internet Explorer 6.0 and see what kind of experience we can get. All right, here's our front page. And wait, LG's getting out of the smartphone business. Well, that's news to me. Yeah, look how fast that loads. Whole article. Breaking news on Windows 98. Yeah, LG actually had some pretty good phones. That's a shame. Mysterious rumblings from inside of Mars. Yeah, loads instantly. I mean, with this horrible little pointer stick that's very difficult to use, the page loads faster than you can even get to scroll it. View our beautiful images of Mars here on this very nice little display. Yeah, pretty good experience. Let's check out FrogFind. All right, let's search for Toshiba Libretto. Yeah, that loads extremely quickly. Much faster than you could get Google to load on this machine. We'll check out the Wikipedia article, which loads instantly. Pretty cool. There's a picture of our libretto. And since we're on FrogFind, we can browse deep into the website and click on all the links, and they'll all go through the FrogFind proxy and get broken down to basic HTML. Okay, now let's try this on a computer that I think is going to have a little bit of trouble. This is my 1986 Mac Plus with an 8 MHz 68,000 processor and a whopping 4 megs of RAM. And we're online thanks to this Asante ENSC Ethernet adapter connected via the obscenely slow SCSI port on this Mac. We're running System 701, which honestly is not ideal. This would be much happier on System 6, which would use a lot less of this 4 megs of RAM. But I had a hard time getting any kind of web browser to run and actually load pages on System 6. And System 755, which is a lot more internet friendly, while it runs on the Mac Plus, it is not a pleasant experience. And the only browser I could get a reasonable experience out of is MacWeb 1.1. For some reason, Netscape 1.1 does not want to work on this machine. It keeps crashing the system. And newer versions of MacWeb, while they run, they don't want to resolve all of the domain names. Okay, so I'd like to start with FrogFind because I think it's going to have a lot easier of a time at least rendering the home page and the search result page. So let's try a search query. Already we can see that this old browser apparently doesn't support the center tag. Let's see if we can read some Ars Technica. All right, well, it's not fast, but it's certainly not unreasonable for 4 megs of RAM and 8 megahertz. Yeah, loaded these search results in about 20 seconds. It actually scrolls just fine. So let's try the Ars Technica homepage. Yeah, after about 20 seconds, we've loaded Ars Technica. Can you believe that? Here it is, and it's usable. And that's just so cool to me because, you know, we're using pretty much all period hardware here, except for the hard drive, everything, the computer, the Ethernet, there's no accelerator. We don't have any Raspberry Pi connected here, and we can browse the internet on MacWeb 1.1 just using this original hardware and nothing else. So let's see just how long it takes to load an article here. Probably a bit longer just for the sake of there being more text, but actually it's loading pretty quickly. Yeah, actually that loaded way faster than I thought it would. So an article about the new 8BitDo controller. I actually have one of these, not the new one, but it's pretty great for playing games on emulators. Wow. Look at that. We can browse the web and just browse websites like Ars Technica here on this Mac Plus at a totally reasonable speed. Okay, and now the computer I'm most excited to try this out on. Let's see if we can browse the web at 1 megahertz on this 38-year-old Apple IIe Enhanced off of a single floppy disk. So this is made possible by an operating system called Contiki, which is really made for embedded systems, which we're running off of a 140 kilobyte 5.25-inch floppy disk. And there's versions of Contiki for the Apple IIe, and each program has its own floppy disk with the embedded operating system plus an app or two. So there's an IRC one that I've made a disk for, and there's a Telnet one that I've made a disk for, which is a Telnet server. So I'll link this in the description below because it's a lot of fun to play with on the Apple II, especially if, like me, you have the Othernet or Othernet 2 Ethernet adapter. So let's just make sure that we have an IP address. And we do, and this is fully mouse enabled, by the way, which is pretty awesome. So we'll just re-request an IP address, and we've got 55, save and close. Actually, I just noticed that the DNS was wrong. So ipconfig again. And I want to change that to 1.1.1.1, which is Cloudflare's DNS server. And is there a more satisfying mouse to click than this? I don't think so. Okay, let's go online with webbrowse.system. Okay, so yeah, mouse enabled. That's pretty awesome. Let's try FrogFind first, because actually the only thing that doesn't work on this computer is the S key. So 68k.news is kind of hard to type. You kind of have to mash the S key a million times before it registers one hit. So we'll try that next. But for now, frogfind.com. And yeah, already loaded. Super fast. So let's look up, I don't know, Stealth Apple 2GS. Oh, of course, the S key doesn't work, but yeah, we still loaded a bunch of stuff. We've got the Wikipedia page on the 2GS. We've got the Apple history page on the 2GS, and then we have our controls up here. We can go down to the next page of results. But let's try Wikipedia. Yeah, there we go. The Wikipedia article on Apple 2GS. Perfectly readable. The Apple 2GS, styled as 2GS, the fifth and most powerful of the Apple II family. Let's click a link. How about Apple II? All right, this article is about the first mass-produced Apple computer. For the series of computers based on it, see Apple II series, all right? Yeah, this works pretty well. Then if we click down, it scrolls to the next chunk of the page. Click on a link in here, Steve Wozniak. All right, here's the Wikipedia page for Steve Wozniak. Surprisingly usable and very readable on this nice Color Monitor 100. All right, well, I must say this works really excellent, FrogFind on here. But let's see if we can get to 68k.news. There we go. To really mash it down to get the S. Yeah, there we go. That loaded really quickly. Also, because this only loads the page one chunk at a time, one screenful at a time, it's actually kind of a better experience than it is on something like a Macintosh, because the Mac GUI browsers load the entire page all at once. So loading one chunk at a time means each chunk is going to take the same amount of time to load. So let's see. I don't want the front page, too much politics. Let's look at science. All right. Raindrops are remarkably similar across different planetary atmospheres. Okay, let's try this. So I do notice that some of the links don't work right. This should be a link to original source, but for some reason it's not working right. So maybe that's some error I've made in the HTML of 68K News, but the article itself loads just fine. This is a perfectly reasonable way to read the news in both 1983 and today, honestly. Look, there's no ads, there's no JavaScript, no Facebook trackers, nothing. Just you and the text. Not too shabby. Okay, so that'll do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this look at how I built these modern web services targeting vintage computers. I had a lot of fun wrangling modern websites to fit into ancient and extremely limited web browsers, and honestly, it came out so much better than I was expecting, and really that's all down to the libraries that I use. So thank you, Mozilla, for making your readability library open source and available for anyone to use, which will be linked in the description below, and the PHP port that I found, which is also linked below. And thank you to DuckDuckGo for being the absolute best search engine there is. So let me know in the comments below what machines you're able to browse with using FrogFind and 68K News. And let me know if you run into any trouble, because I definitely want to make these services work as well as possible and try to make as much of the modern web readable as possible on our beloved vintage machines. But if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more vintage computing shenanigans like this, please subscribe down below, and thank you very much for watching. And a special thanks to Dirk, Justin, Chris, Greg from RutK Mods, Sorta Eclectic, Spike, and Connor, who are my highest tiered patrons, and all of my Patreon supporters who help make these videos possible.